Palestinian state. On point 2 is on the economic blockade in Manipur after an ambush on Assam Rifles personnel. On point 3 is on Pak's terror tantrums and off the cricket field whether India should play against them again. It is the Great Gaza Showdown in UNGA. All eyes are on the New York, where more than 140 world leaders are set to meet for the annual United Nations General Assembly Summit, with a focus on the future of the Palestine and Gaza. Saudi Arabia and France are set to co-chair meetings on a two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The French presidency said that the 10 countries would formally recognize Palestinian statehood during the summit. Britain, Canada, Australia and Portugal have officially recognized Palestine as an independent state. With this, the number of countries recognizing Palestine as a country is set to reach 150.
Écoutez, je voulais faire cette petite réaction parce que j'ai reçu depuis d'ailleurs des jours, des semaines, beaucoup de remarques, d'interpellations de votre part, parfois beaucoup de colère, de tristesse, quelquefois des encouragements sur évidemment la décision que nous avons prise et aussi la situation, avant tout la situation en ce moment à Gaza.
So this is a historic step and a moral step which we're taking alongside our allies to recognise the state of Palestine in order to keep the hope of the two-state solution alive at a time when there is a real risk that it is in peril as a result of the devastation in Gaza, the continued holding of hostages and the expansion of settlements.
Today, September 21st, 2025, the Portuguese state officially recognizes the state of Palestine. The declaration of recognition does not, however, erase the ongoing humanitarian catastrophe in the Gaza Strip. The Portuguese government has repeatedly and insistently condemned the restrictions on humanitarian aid. The situation of hunger caused the forced displacement of populations in the Gaza Strip.
At present, Palestine is recognized as a state by roughly 147 of the United Nations' 193 member states. With the British and the French recognition, Palestine will soon enjoy the support of 4 of the UN Security Council's 5 permanent members. China and Russia recognized Palestine in 1988. This will leave the US, Israel's strongest ally, in a minority of 1. Washington has recognized the Palestinian Authority, currently headed by Mahmoud Abbas, since its formation in the mid-90s. Since then, several presidents have expressed their support for the eventual creation of a Palestinian state. But under Donald Trump, US policy has leaned in favor of Israel. The wave of recognition represents a big departure from the long-standing Western position that the Palestinian statehood should emerge only as the outcome of the direct negotiation with Israel. That framework began losing momentum after the failure of the US-brokered peace talks in 2014. The Palestine Liberation Organization declared an independent Palestinian state in 1988. A large number of countries from Global South recognized it in the year that followed. Now let us look at India's relationship with Palestine. India's support for the Palestinian cause is an integral part of the nation's foreign policy. In 1974, India became the first non-Arab state to recognize the PLO. In 1988, India became one of the first countries to recognize the Palestinian state. In 1996, India opened the representative office in Gaza, which was later shifted to Ramallah in 2023. Last week, 193-member General Assembly adopted the resolution participation by the state of Palestine, with 145 nations voting in favor. America and Israel opposed the measure, while India was among those supporting it. The two-state solution, which now people are talking, is also a result of what is happening in the Gaza. The Hamas attack on Israel and the subsequent large force response by the Israeli security. The two-state solution is an internationally backed formula for the peace between Israel and Palestinians. It proposes an independent Palestinian state in the West Bank and Gaza with East Jerusalem as its capital. It would exist alongside Israel. Israel rejects a two-state solution. It says any final settlement must be the result of negotiations with the Palestinians and statehood should not be a precondition. The Palestinian Authority backs up control of the area known as the Palestine in the World War I, following the defeat of the Ottoman Empire. Sykes-Picot Accord. The two men redrew the boundaries of West Asia. An Arab majority and a Jewish minority lived in Palestine as well as other ethnic groups. Tensions between Jewish and the Arab population spiked after the Balfour Declaration of 1970, in which the UK agreed in principle to the establishment of a national home in the Palestine for the Jewish people. Between the 1920s and 40s, the number of Jews arriving grew, with many fleeing persecution in Europe because Hitler was killing Jews, putting them in the concentration camp. In 1947, the UN voted for Palestine to be split into separate Jewish and Arab states. Jewish leaders accepted the plan, which gave them 56% of the land. The Arab League rejected it. They argued the plan gave the Jews more of the land, even though their population was smaller. Britain decided to withdraw and handed over the problem to United Nations. Jewish leaders in Palestine declared an independent state known as Israel in May 1948, hours before the British rule ended. A day later, 5 Arab states attacked, and with the war ended, with Israel controlling 77% of the territory. Israel was recognized by the UN the following year. Some 7 lakh Palestinians fled or were driven from their homes, ending up in Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, as well as in the Gaza Strip, the West Bank and East Jerusalem. In Arabic, it's known as Nakba or the Big Disaster. On this issue, I'm joined by L.A. Peish, Director International Relations, Israel Defense and Security Forum. Thank you so much, sir, for joining me. Professor Scott Lucas, Professor International Politics, Clinton Institute, University College of Dublin, live from Dublin. Thank you, sir. And Ambassador Mahesh Sachdev. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much. Let me straight away go to Ambassador Mahesh Sachdev. Sir, my question is very simple. Experts, they're of the view that the war should have a political solution, but the very political solution is being resisted. Why?
Thank you for having me, firstly. You asked a simple question, but any answer would have to be elliptical because there are strong narratives and counter-narratives involved. The current situation dates back to 1967 war, Yom Kippur War, and 67 war, followed by 73's Yom Kippur War and the Camp David Agreement, following which we had Oslo Accord and more or less a two-state solution was agreed to, and negotiations were held on the terms of the Palestine state being created. There was a wide difference, although Clinton administration tried very hard to bridge the gap between Yehud Barak and Yasser Arafat, but the distance remained unbridged. And that's where in year 2000, the last major negotiations between the two sides ended. And since then, we've had Gaza being withdrawn by Israel and Hamas taking it over from Al-Fatah, and settlement activity in West Bank, leading us to October 7, the brutal invasion and massacre and hostage taking, and beginning of the Gaza war, which has been ongoing and would complete 2 years next month.
Okay.
Now, with this narrative, one finds difficulty in either apportioning blames or suggesting solutions. I think the temperatures would have to come down on the battlefield, and some modicum of modus vivendi would have to be established before any negotiations or any sort of final settlement can take place.
Okay.
I think what is also involved here is the future of the Abraham Accord, because these are supposed to lead to normalization of the Middle East situation. And much would depend on how this pans out after this very eventful year, which has seen Israel fight Lebanese Hezbollah, Iran, Yemen, and Yemen's Houthis, and so on.
Okay.
And we would need to wait
Okay.
till the dust settles down.
Okay. Ile, let me bring you in. Is peace possible without two-state solution? Do you think the solution for peace goes through a military operation? That's number one, Ile. And my second question is that why is there resistance? Because if you look at the history of conversation in context of bringing resolution, it's always about creating a sort of an independent, semi-independent, or a Palestine with its own identity.
So are you talking to me?
Yes, Ele, that's you.
Oh. So first of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm sorry I didn't catch that, but I would say no. Peace will not go through any kind of two-state solution. You know, when Israel was founded in 1948-49, Israel was founded. Yes, the UN did vote for a partition plan, but when 5 independent Arab nations attacked Israel, there was no one to support Israel other than Israel. Israel supported itself, achieved a ceasefire agreement, and that's why Israel was around. And from 49 to 1967, for 18 years, we essentially lived in a two-state solution environment. The West Bank, which now many countries, including India, want to recognize as a Palestinian state, was controlled by Jordan. No one at that point accused Jordan as occupying sovereign Palestinian land. And we continued and existed that way in a basically a two-state solution environment, and it did not achieve peace. We did not live in harmony. We did not achieve peace. There were attacks after attacks, eventually culminating in the Six-Day War in 1967, eventually then later on, the 1973 Yom Kippur War, war after war after war, until we find ourselves today. So the idea that there is going to now be some sort of peace by creating a Palestinian state, which has shown no interest in reforming, no interest in moderating, only supporting Hamas, supporting everything that is going on. They're not condemning October 7th. We are finding more and more terror entities within the areas controlled by the Palestinian Authority. It is only moving towards more friction, not towards peace.
Ile, is Israel conflating people of Palestine with the terrorist organization Hamas?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. The people of Hamas are governing in Gaza. But the people of the Palestinian Authority, the Fatah, which are just basically the same, they have the same attitudes, the same incitement, the same way they treat their people, the exact same thing, other than it's that they wear suits and ties. That's the only difference. And if you look at the level of just this past week, we've arrested over 75 terrorists in the West Bank area, in Judea and Samaria, areas governed by the Palestinian Authority. In Ramallah, we found missiles, a whole cell that was developing missiles and that had created missiles to attack Israel, to attack central Israel. We see the exact same thing happening. We found tunnels, we found weapons manufacturing areas in Palestinian controlled areas. It's a very similar thing. They have different styles. Hamas is much more aggressive. They're much more, they wear their terrorism on their arms. The Fatah, the more moderate looking Fatah, they want to be more diplomatic, but the core is very similar.
Professor Lucas, your opening comments, and my question is twofold, sir. My first question is, what the West is doing, is it just symbolic? Because it's not ending the war. You are saying we recognize the Palestinian state, but it doesn't have any impact on the ground situation of Gaza. That's number one, sir. And Professor, the second question is, what about the West Bank? If the settlement continues, it'll add on to the anger, it'll add on to the grief, it'll churn another cycle of violence.
I agree with our Israeli friend that on its own, the two-state recognition of the state of Palestine does not end the violence. It does not end Israel's mass killing inside Gaza, which followed Hamas's mass killing inside Israel. It doesn't end the expansion of Israel's military operations. It does not expand Israel or the Netanyahu government's ambition, which is for a long-term occupation of Gaza. But the two-state, or recognition of the state of Palestine, is an important, powerful political symbol in terms of where we want to be. First of all, it redefines Israel's attacks on Gaza, not just simply as attacks on Hamas, erasing the idea of the Gazan people or the West Bank people. It redefines Israel's attacks as an attack on the state of Palestine. It redefines Israel's cutoff of humanitarian aid as a cutoff to those who live in the state of Palestine. And secondly, if please, we get a halt to the Israeli attacks, the return of the Israeli hostages held by Hamas, it sets the starting point for negotiations for a two-state resolution. Now, there may be those who do not want to wish to negotiate for that, but it means the international community has made that very clear. In terms of your second question, I think it's important that you do raise this, because in fact, our Israeli friend has actually only given part of the story in terms of the West Bank. Israeli military operations have expanded in the West Bank during the duration of the attacks on Gaza, and the expansion of Israel's illegal settlements in the West Bank have expanded to the point of threatening to cut off part of the West Bank from another part of the West Bank through a settlement called E1. So yes, I think if you're talking about getting a secure Israel with its people living in security and a secure Palestine with its people living in security, this is the way that you have to go. And again, I'd ask our Israeli friend, if you do not agree with that, what is your alternative here? Is it the long-term occupation of Palestine by Israel, which will put you in a position where you will have to face the consequences of that occupation indefinitely, with no end in sight, including your isolation from much of the international community?
So Lucas, just to quote Franz Fanon from The Wretched of the Earth, how do you end this cycle of violence which feeds on the diet of violence which spills into media every day?
No. I think you end this with certain recognitions. And that is, first of all, you have to have a recognition on each side politically that you will not eliminate the other. It is interesting that in a way, the international community has made it clear that Hamas will not return to power in Gaza. The states that are pursuing the recognition of the state of Palestine, the summit that is discussing the two-state resolution today, led by France and Saudi Arabia, have made it clear that Hamas will not return to power. At the same time, they have made it clear that an Israeli occupation is not the way to go. You must have Palestinians being able to govern Palestinians while the area is reconstructed and rebuilt. You must eventually have Palestinians able to govern Palestinians in the West Bank without Israeli occupation. And you must have Israelis secure that they can live in security without Hamas's position that they should not exist. Now, if you don't have to have that recognition, you don't get to the security. And I must be very honest with you, your viewers, and our colleagues. The chief barrier right now to a ceasefire is not Hamas. It is not the Gazan people. Hamas accepted the broad framework of the ceasefire proposal that was put over the last few weeks. The actor who rejected the ceasefire proposal was the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, not even being willing to consider it, and instead not only continuing the attacks on Gaza, but trying to kill Hamas's negotiators with the bombing inside Qatar.
That's an important point, Ambassador Sachdev. Do you think it's the position of Benjamin Netanyahu which is having an overall impact on the way things are panning out in Israel, Gaza, West Bank, sir? Something which has to do with the framework of one individual? You know, in history, we have had leaders who have actually changed the course of the countries. For example, Deng in China. Ambassador Sachdev?
There are conflicting opinions in this regard. Many in Israel believe that Prime Minister Netanyahu's policies have prolonged the Gaza conflict. I should point out to the report where Army Chief himself has expressed an opinion against continuing to assault Gaza City. And I think there are people who have concern for the hostages and believe that such aggressive actions as bombing a Hamas office in Doha or taking on the high-rise buildings in Gaza City does not help secure the hostages. In fact, the demonstrators on the streets of Israel believe that it actually does exactly the opposite. Hardens the opponents with what Jews call Masada complex, that they're going to die and they're going to take everyone with them. I do hope that eventually Senior Council would prevail and we would be able to have the hostages freed and 65 or 66,000 Palestinians who have died would the number would not go any further. Thank you.
Okay, so Ilay, my question to you is: you said that yes, Hamas is unrepentant. You said that the terrorists are still hiding. But what happens to the Palestinian people? My question is about the people. What happened to those where the basic infrastructure in Gaza has been destroyed? Because Gaza today, if you ask me, is unlivable. What I see from the TV screens.
Well, it's very true, and many Gaza people are completely understand that the people who are responsible for that is Hamas, not Israel. Israel is providing them, despite my colleagues' comments, is providing humanitarian aid. You almost never in the history is you have a war where the one side is fighting the other, and that side is providing the humanitarian aid while the war is going on. Not with the ceasefire, but while the war is going on. I was actually at the border earlier this week, or actually, I'm sorry, last week. I was there last week. Saw the aid going through. Saw how many packages are going through. Trucks are going in. And just this week, we had one of those trucks that Israel was allowing in was coming in from Jordan. We're going to go across Israel to Gaza, and the person driving the truck went out and shot the Israelis. So you talk about people who are, you have Israel, who is risking their own lives in order to provide humanitarian aid to Gaza civilians, while Hamas is preventing Gazans from getting that aid, is threatening Gazans who want to flee where the war is going. Why? Because the Hamas needs the Gaza to continue to act as human shields for them. We saw this week videos that were released by Gazans, not by Israel, but by Gazans, showing Hamas killing and executing Gazans who they consider to be collaborating with Israel. That means getting humanitarian aid from Israel or from the Gaza Humanitarian Fund, trying to organize people to leave the Gaza city so that the Gaza terrorists, the Hamas terrorists, will be exposed. They won't be able to be surrounded by human shields.
Okay.
This is what we're dealing with. And Israel is going to continue, despite the efforts of its friends and allies. In this war, Israel has recognized that it needs to politely disagree with many of its allies when it comes to its own national security. Every previous war, Israel has ended with Palestinians or Palestinian entities, has ended prematurely. We've always ended in a ceasefire, whether it was the war in 49, whether it was the war in 67, the war in 73. There's never been an actual surrender. And until we get that surrender from Hamas, there will not be peace for Israel or for the people in Gaza or for any other Palestinians.
Okay. Professor Lucas, I'll take a closing comment from you. You know, when the Germany was destroyed, there was a Marshall Plan. You know, the Gaza has undergone a similar sort of intensity of warfare. But then what looks like it is a permanent displacement of community. Do you think that this strip will or has the capacity to go back to normal in near future? Or are we looking at a permanently displaced set of people in West Asia?
Of course, Gaza has the capacity. Palestinians want to live in economic security. They want to rebuild their country. They aren't just simply puppets. But I despair when I hear what our Israeli friend says. I despair for two reasons. First of all, I despair when propaganda is put out to replace facts, to justify the mass killing. Israel cut off all aid into Gaza at the start of March. It then set up token aid points at which a very small amount of aid was provided without security, and more than 1,500 Palestinians were killed. There has been some aid which has been put on the border to Gaza, but it is far less than the 500 trucks per day which are required for basic subsistence. Israel has only provided, on most days, 50 to 100 trucks of subsistence. Yesterday it did reach more than 400. So no, the threat of starvation continues, and the UN has said that. And secondly, I despair when I hear what that concluding remark, which was effectively we have to have an unconditional surrender. An unconditional surrender of whom? Remember, that using your analogy, that Germany unconditionally surrendered in 1945 when its cities were blown to bits, when not only those who conducted the war, but civilians were wiped out in much of the country. Are we really saying, really hearing, that Israel is not going to negotiate, but is simply going to wipe out Gaza and destroy it? Because it's not just our Israeli friend who has said that. Ministers in the Netanyahu government have said that the people of Gaza must be taken out of Gaza. They must be removed from their homes. They must be displaced. Donald Trump has said there must be a Middle East on the Riviera without Gazans. That is the point that we are at now.
Okay. Thank you all of you. Elish, I've really run short of time, or else I would have given you. But thank you all of you for joining me for this conversation on the future of Gaza. So this was on point one. But on the next on point, we will talk about the economic blockade in Manipur after the ambush on Assam rifle pistol, and why did that attack took place. But after a short break.
Alakazam face disappears. Mom, Dad.
Smooth, silent, seamless. Sliding systems from headache.
Dreaming about me.
Love is to get lost in the look. Unlimit Love B6 Pack 2 starts at 21.9 lakh.